Well, you have,
I think we are
everyone has
live.
better.
I
Okay.
think we are live. Welcome everybody to our Yoga Scholars PGIMER platform. Today we are coming live at a different time, not 6 p.m. but 8:30 p.m. This suits our eminent speaker, Elissa Epel. Let's welcome the professor and vice chair of adult psychology at University California, San Francisco. She studies stress, resilience, and mindfulness in relation to metabolism and aging. She has examined how mindfulness, meditation retreats, biobehavioral interventions may buffer stress processes, biological aging, and promote psychological and physiological thriving. She co leads an NIH network on stress measurement, and she is a member of the National Academy of Medicine. And she's co chair of the Mind and Life Steering Council. Apple enjoys integrating science with contemplative practices with colleagues and has taught at SLM Big Sur, uh, Blue Spirit Costa Rica, and Upaya. Those are different parts of the world, I believe. And we are so fortunate to have her with us because we've been trying to spearhead the lockdown integrative medicine updates, or call it yoga education series, and trying to bring the scientific and authentic aspects of yoga and the Ayush system for the benefit of our audience in the Facebook, who are about to touch 10,000. Our total views, thanks to everybody's interest, has now crossed 1 million, and
Wow.
it gives us a good interface to bring the citizen science in the fore
Any
by
request, ma'am?
engaging people from science, spirituality, physicians, general public, and about 20% of our audience are international fellow colleagues and citizens. So we welcome them. So Elissa has also written one of the very famous books called The Telomere Effect, a revolutionary approach to living younger and longer, with Liz Blackburn. And it's a New York Times bestseller. She's passionate about yoga, so we're excited about that, and hopes at some point to study yoga interventions. She wants to study yoga interventions. She's probably already studying. She has lots of publications. We actually shared two of our prime publications, and we expect that you will be asking questions. So I'll keep a tab on Facebook viewers, and you can just punch in and you can type something. Our team will take a note of that and pose it to her. So with that, we invite Dr. Elissa Apple to please come and share your thoughts and research. Over to
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you so much, Professor Anand. It is really such a pleasure to talk to you all this evening there. Namaste, morning for me. It's rare to get to talk to such a wonderful, diverse group of colleagues, of brothers and sisters across the world. So I appreciate the little bit of time we have together. And I want to share with you what I've been doing in our research and what I think is important. So I study how to measure psychological stress. And I also study caregivers, people who are under tremendous stress, and we examine how it's affecting their mood, depression, their speed of their cell aging, looking at things like telomere length, the protective caps at the ends of chromosomes. There's some great research from India on telomeres and diabetes and other aspects. I have several colleagues who do this work, beautiful aspects of this work as well. And what we have found over the decade is that shortening telomeres is a correlate or symptom of any mind or body disease, any psychiatric disease. Most of them do appear to be associated with telomere shortness. And that means the immune system is aging more quickly. And that means the cells cannot replenish and continue to work as well and fight antigens, but rather they become pro-inflammatory. In the blood, you get this elevation of cytokines, of pro-inflammatory cytokines. So that's immune aging, and telomeres are one aspect of that. I thought I would talk to you about what we're doing and thinking in terms of stress measurements. And maybe this will be helpful to you. And we need collaborators actually across the world in measuring stress better. And then I would like to tell you about a few studies that we have done on meditation and what we have found in terms of how this affects biological functioning. And lastly, I would like to leave some time for questions. So when we think of stress, we think of, you know, feeling stress, perceived stress. It's usually what people think of if you're a psychologist. And that's just one aspect of stress. But it turns out that what we say is just loosely related to our objective stress in the body, our cortisol, our telomeres, uh, what we like to call our allostatic load, the kind of wear and tear on our biology. So there's really some channels that are related but independent of feeling stressed and how our body keeps stress. We hold on to stress and we feel stress arousal. And that is just somewhat related to what we say. So we like to measure both. I think of it as unconscious stress, that we carry stress because we are expecting bad things to happen, even if we're not aware of it. And that is especially for people who have had early life adversity, especially, let's just say these days, we are living in a pandemic. I know that we're all struggling in different ways. I like to think of it as one storm, big global storm, many boats. We're all in different situations with different resources, different risk levels. So we're having many different types of responses or experiences to this common shared stressor of this damn terrible virus. So we have started a network to measure stress better. We call it the NIH Stress Measurement Network. Our government helps pay for it. And we have a website. I would like you to look at it, especially if you're a researcher. And I give Professor Anand the link to this. It will tell you, it breaks down stress into what we are exposed to, what's happening, and then our response, which is, of course, what determines how long the stressor goes on in our body. So, for example, stressful events can be very quick, but if we're ruminating and thinking about it, then it's very hard to say that there's an end to the stress. And this is how we develop chronic stress. And that's what wears out our cells more quickly. I love yoga. Personally, I trained as a yoga teacher for my, deeper knowledge and understanding. Love the 8 limbs of yoga. I feel that when we do very conscious or mindful yoga, we are tapping into the unconscious stress that we can't get at otherwise. We are allowing our body to feel safe. We're allowing the restoration that we don't usually naturally feel in this kind of modern world when we're bombarded by information and screens and time stress. So I am very moved in my own life by the experience of course, the 8 limbs, the philosophy, as well as the states of yoga. And I have one of my teachers is Janet Stone, who is part Indian and leads groups to India. And I found that for my type A tendencies, that a complete surrender pose was actually one of the poses that helped me get at unconscious stress and really fight my tendency to have an overvigilant nervous system. And so this is, lying flat, face flat like this. When you are on the ground, face flat in a prostration, it's almost impossible to feel stress. It's impossible to think of doing anything. You are just being and surrendering. So I love that. I haven't studied it yet, but I would like to. So one of the ways we're thinking about measuring stress better now, besides just different types of stress and different types of responses, is getting at some of the global stress that exists today, like political stress, climate distress, racial distress, discrimination. There are measures of discrimination, but we can do better. We need to measure people's experience in a more granular way, looking at common experiences they feel on a more daily basis, not just a one-time trait measure. So we are looking for collaborators and help. If you are studying this or you know of measures, of course, I could only read them in English, but we really want to host on our website for stress measurement the better measures for global studies of aging. We are associated with 30 studies in 30 countries following older people, midlife and older. We want to understand how people age, what speeds it up, what slows it down. So stress is, of course, one factor. I have a colleague, Jin Cook Lee from um, University of Southern California. She is studying, it's called the Lassie study. She's studying aging in many areas in India. And so that's very exciting. So the same battery we can use in the United States and then compare. So we measure things like caregiving stress, loneliness, um, exposure to violence or trauma, particularly when people are young. So those are on the exposure side. And then in the response side, we try to measure how much people are ruminating, how much negative emotion and positive emotion they're having. So mindfulness interventions are very interesting because they can uniquely turn on our metacognition so we can see the internal machinery. We can see how much someone is carrying stress with them, how much they're ruminating, how much they're worrying. So for the part that we can actually observe, this uh, meditation is very helpful because it turns on our ability to actually um, have an experience of seeing our thoughts as just thoughts, laughing at them, knowing what they are. So it's just amazing and beautiful. And of course, when we do a mind body activity, it puts us in a more metacognitive state. And it also helps us release some of this unconscious stress. So I'll tell you about two meditation studies that I've done. One was at Deepak Chopra's retreat center. He leads a very popular retreat. It's not quite mindfulness, it's primordial sound meditation. It's a form of transcendental meditation, mantra meditation, very popular. And the anecdotes were wild. People were saying that this was life changing, this 1 week at the Chopra Center. So we went in and we studied it and we took blood before and after the the meditation retreat. But we were able to control the experimental design so well. We randomized half of these people who never meditated in their life to be living at the resort and walking and eating very healthy Ayurvedic diet. But they were just by the pool. They didn't get any mind training. The other half got meditation training, mantra training. What did we find? At the end of 1 week, we found a very, twofold increase in gene expression. We changed up what our cells were making. So we can't change the DNA, but we can change the output, which genes are turned on and the proteins they're making. So when we look at this gene expression, we found that we were turning down the volume on stress and immune processes. The body realized I'm safe. There's no computer screens. There's nothing to do for a week. And so it stopped fighting. So we had a dramatic reduction in different stress processes and immune fighting. The meditation group had a bit of a different gene expression profile, but the psychological responses were identical. Everyone felt better at the end of a week. One of the points is we must take vacation. Vacation is so important. A month later, they still looked better. But a year later, that's when we see the difference emerge. The people who learned mantra meditation had much better mental health almost a year later. Of course, many of them were still practicing, so it wasn't magic, but it was a way that they uh, stopped common habits, mental habits, and had more ease and peace. It's a daily practice that builds up. The depression was much lower in the meditation group, and especially for people who had early adversity. People with early trauma, childhood difficulties, adversity, violence, neglect, abuse, they come in with more depression, but they respond more, they benefit more. So that's exciting. We have we have 5 minutes left. I would love to know if there are any questions. And if not, I will keep talking.
Would you like to explain a little bit about the granular aspect that you mentioned?
I
What
would.
about granularity of psychological? Was it scoring, correct scoring?
Yes. So when I say granular, I think part of what we do in these controlled trials is we measure, for example, meditation versus a support group. And when we just look at feelings of stress, everyone looks the same. They all benefit. So in the Deepak Chopra study, when we looked a week later at depression and feelings of stress, everyone feels better. We cannot see the effect of the meditation. And I believe this is because this is not a very granular measure. We need to get more specific and measure processes that we're directly targeting with meditation, like rumination. If we were able to measure some aspects of the nervous system, like how much does our autonomic nervous system relax during sleep, I believe that that's a really, conceptually, that's a great measure of how we hold unconscious stress. And if we are doing yoga or meditation every day, we really should be able to get to a deeper restorative state sooner while we sleep. So some people's blood pressure doesn't dip. Most of us have a decrease in heart rate and blood pressure, but some people don't. So that is a very big example of how we hold on to stress even when we sleep, even unconscious sleep. Another study I'll tell you about quite very quickly is we were very interested in trying to help pregnant women with a lot of excess weight. And so we recruited very low income women, very high stress lives, very poor, food insecurity. And we provided both some education on nutrition, some mindful eating so that their actual process of eating was more in, conscious. So they were enjoying the food and the flavor and trying their hunger and their feelings of satiation. And this was a very um, big, effortful study. And at the end of the pregnancy, the women who got the mindful eating and the nutrition education gained just as much weight. Oh, it was so disappointing. But their oral glucose tolerance test was much improved. So the practices of meditation and improved nutrition or mindful eating was improving their glucose control. And that's very important, maybe more so than what's on the scale, maybe more so than the weight or the BMI. So this was an exciting study, and it's a very impactful study because not only are the moms then healthier during this very critical period, but the offspring might have benefited. So we're still studying the babies and looking at how they might have benefited. And so far, it does look like the moms who had the stress reduction during pregnancy had babies who were less sick. They went to the doctor less. Their temperament is such that they recover from stress more quickly. So we're excited about pregnancy interventions, and prenatal yoga in pregnancy would be, of course, an obvious thing to study. I don't know if people have done that yet with
Oh, this is
mom's health.
exciting because
Yeah.
Pooja, who is also here, is planning to do a intervention study among the pregnant women. She has a pregnancy protocol, and we want to look at the umbilical cord blood-derived stem cell yield, apart
Yes.
from pregnancy outcome and the baby which is born, the weight and the preterm, whether it's a
Wow.
C-section. It's
It's
it's being
such a
planned.
good design, Pooja. Yes, this is very exciting. If I were to choose an ideal study, it would be indeed, well, actually, we would catch the moms before they're pregnant because we can't help them lose weight once they're pregnant. It's very difficult. But this idea of the critical period of pregnancy is so important. It shapes the health of the next generation. Pooja, if you can look at the telomeres in the cord blood, that might be interesting too. We have found, my colleagues, Patik Wadhwa, um, Janet Wojcicki, Sonia Ettinger, have several studies on pregnancy and found that the baby's telomere length in their cord blood is shaped by certain factors in pregnancy, or it's at least correlated. So, if, for example, um, if the mother has more stressful events during pregnancy, the baby's cord blood telomere length is shorter. So there's a lot happening, a lot of intergenerational transmission during this short period that is going to be very important for the baby's whole life. We can't change telomere length dramatically. So how it starts off at birth is very important. Petit Gwadwa and Sonia Endringer call it the initial setting of
Would you
telomere
want
length.
to ask something?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your suggestion, ma'am. I want to ask that how stress and obesity that mothers face during their pregnancy is related to the epigenetic changes in infant or baby.
This is
As
a
you
great
have
question.
mentioned in the, there are epigenetic changes in infants. So can you please explain that?
My version of the epigenetic changes is that we don't know enough yet, but we should all be collecting the uh, the DNA in a way that we can look at all of the different epigenetic patterns that will become important. The field, for example, the field of clocks, epigenetic clocks, this amazing, exciting field founded by Steve Horvath. The number of clocks are many. They keep coming out with new clocks, and they're not so related to each other. The way the methylation patterns are, a clock that predicts disease versus a clock that predicts age is very different, almost no overlap. So it feels like we don't really know enough yet to make statements about what's happening epigenetically. Certainly, there are studies to show it's important. So clocks can have some predictive power for disease and mortality, but which clocks and when, and is it that that clock is uh, biologically, mechanistically meaningful? We don't know the mechanism of the epigenetic clocks yet. They're devised in a data-driven way where we say, tell us all the, CPG codes, the patterns that predict mortality, and then we can predict mortality. It's math. Um, but the pregnancy studies with epigenetics, Pooja, is probably one of the most interesting areas. And there are a handful of studies showing that uh, there is some relationship between mom's health and baby's clock, the age when they're born. Although it's a bit conflicting right now. I think we're hopefully going to learn a lot more in the next 5 years if people can really use pregnancy as a model, as a critical time to intervene and to examine the different ways that aging starts in the womb, like the epigenetic clock, like telomeres, like inflammation.
Thank you for that exciting explanation. We took some time to go to the gynecology. The head of the gynecology was very interested, but we had quite a conversation trying to convince if you should have pregnancy and this really very interesting, and I think we should read more and maybe incorporate some of the important suggestions you have made. I will quickly go to the Facebook viewer. Dr. Manjari asks, did you find the genes of telomere or telomerase upregulated in any of your studies? Would you like to comment on that?
This is a good question. My colleague Julien has looked at um, the telomere genes, the genes that predict for longer telomeres and higher telomerase. And when we look at the genes, it's a bit of a different story than the actual measured telomere length, because if you have really good telomere genes that create higher telomerase throughout the life, you are more at risk for certain cancers. So it's this double-edged sword. You want good telomeres, but you don't want really high loading for telomerase genes because that can put you at risk of cancer. When we looked at the gene expression, your question, we did this in the Deepak Chopra study, for example. My colleague Eric Schatt at Mount Sinai looked at the networks, the gene networks, and we looked at what changed in the telomere and telomerase genes. the meditation group, not the control group, not the vacation group, but the meditation group had an increase in telomere-related genes. And they also had an increase in telomerase, the actual enzyme, the protein. So that was exciting. It was a small sample. We don't make too much of a big deal about it, but it was suggestive that in the short run, we can upregulate these very helpful genes for aging.
How long was
Yeah.
that meditation, Elissa?
This was a week. This was just a retreat for a week. And I think it is nice when we can look at acute changes when in a controlled environment. I really like, retreat studies. It is yeah. It is a not necessarily what the general public can do. And so it's more of a proof of concept. I also had a colleague, Cliff Sarin, who did a 3-month meditation retreat study, and he was able to measure telomerase just at the end of the study. It was higher at the end of the study. That was exciting. And especially for people who felt these increases in emotional well-being, they felt more control, they felt more purpose in life. And so I wish we could replicate that study because it's so compelling. We know purpose is predictive of longevity, feeling daily purpose. And how do we induce that? So mind-body activities appear to be one way that we can get in touch with our essence, our true self, our purpose. And in his shamatha meditation retreat, it did indeed increase purpose, but more so for some people than others.
Mm-hmm.
And those who had the increases had the benefits in telomerase.
Yeah. Here's another comment in the Facebook popping up saying that some of the genes, proteins of telomerase are involved in regulating ROS. Maybe this is helpful. So do you want to speculate if it is?
Well, I think it's a great point. We don't, the telomerase has many functions. It's not just to protect and build telomeres. The telomerase does protect from reactive oxygen species. It can reduce oxidative stress in the cell. This is work in part by Carol Greider, maybe others I don't know about too. So it's it's very important. It also, this telomerase gene, TERT, turns up to be important in the epigenetic clock. So that's very interesting that in a unbiased analysis, one of the important genes for the clock was TERT, was a telomerase gene. So that is, even though telomeres and the epigenetic clock for age are not really very related, maybe 0.2, there's a weak relationship, but mechanistically there may be more.
There's another comment from our panel, Radhika, asking, how long was that session that you mentioned? 1 hour, 1.5 hours, the week thing in which you found the genes were altered?
Okay, so this was I was talking about 2 studies. One was the pregnancy meditation, mindfulness study, and that went on for 2 months, and it was a weekly class. The other study I mentioned was the retreat, mantra meditation retreat study. That was 1 week. And for about 8 hours a day, they had programming, yoga, meditation, reflection. So 8 hours. It was we'll say a high dose each day.
Yeah, we had a similar program. We have one in which we test the efficacy of Sudarshan Kriya. I wonder you've heard of that. The Art of Living have something called the Sudarshan Kriya Advanced Program, and they take you up to a location. So we wanted to study the effect of high altitude and how we can rescue the the bad effects of high altitude sickness as a result of this intervention. So it reminds me of the 8-hour thing. They take you for 4 days with Ayurvedic diet on a retreat, and it's about 6 to 8 hours of meditation or walking around in that place, and three days of complete silence. So that is also part of that 4 day of.
And what did you find? Do you have results yet?
Oh, we found PO2 levels went up, the LDL levels came down, the BMI came down, And most importantly, when you mentioned type A personality, I was about to ask you, I know you have very little time to us for the question and answers, but I wanted to say that the kinds of personalities can be mapped to Ayurvedic principles of Kapha Vata with, the doshas. And so we found that a particular prakriti, as we call them, or the Ayurvedic description of the clinical symptoms, or description of the type, you may call it type 8, whatever. So a certain prakriti individuals they responded better to this Sudarshan Kriya intervention in high altitude than the other doshas. So the
Very
LO went
interesting.
down, yeah, and the PO2 levels went up. And I think the PO2 level when going up is significant in our current COVID crisis, Think about the ICUs and all that. So, but that was anyway study in the sort of a hypoxic environment, not really
That's
hypoxic.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, this
We'll publish
idea of
that. This came
characterizing,
out
I would
in,
like to see,
yeah,
please.
yeah.
This idea of like that we can have phenotype people with the doshas. Um, it would be so great if you would also use some of the Western measures and see if there's any mapping on the types of personality and stress. And of course, mapping it to physiology is the most important, but it will help us translate what this Ayurvedic wisdom means in our kind of with our language and our science. It would be great. I have a colleague that you should interview next. His name is Paul Mills. He's at UC San Diego, and he
Okay.
also studies doshas and
Yeah.
mind-body
Great.
health.
Yeah, great. Quickly, one or two more questions. I know you restricted us to just 5 questions. Parul is a postdoctoral fellow working with us, did a graduation with us in our own lab. Parul, are you around to ask any question?
Sir,
You
I
can,
want to know
you can come
type
alive
of
so we can.
meditation.
Yeah, go ahead.
In pregnancy during pregnancy and in which you gave
I think
it's
we
for
have
the
an
whole
audio.
period during the pregnancy.
Come again. Try again.
Parul, can you type your question? I cannot hear you. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Go ahead and type it in the chat
type the
box.
question.
Yeah. So did you find any change, Elissa, in your own type A configuration when you did the meditation?
Yes. And if I go a week without yoga, I am not as nice of a person.
I agree with you. I find the same. My wife tells me I'm type A as well. But yes, if I miss my session, I really get irritated. And it sometimes gets to a migraine. If I work day in and day out, looking at reviews, reviewing grants, writing grants, so much of work, so much of intellectual activity. And if I do not do my Sudarshan Kriya or my pranayama, definitely it really is. So that's another area of research, isn't it? How long you have to do to have a lasting effect. Any research on that?
No, I want to know. I would like to know. I think in my own experience, of course, I am have a very different calibration of mindfulness high and stress low when I am in an environment when I can practice daily. And I mean, I dream about living at a retreat center, right? It will never happen, but just that environment, all of the cues around you, it's a relationship with a peaceful environment that tells you and reminds you because of the nature and beauty and quiet, etc. So I live in a city, and so I especially need a daily practice. So daily is of course a strong effect, but I do think that a long, class, like at least an hour and 45 minutes or 2 hours once a week can still have an effect. It has for me. It's not enough. It's not, I want to say it's not a maximal benefit, but it's a minimum.
Some of the yogic scholars say that you reach a certain level after doing so many hours of meditation or yoga, and then you start from there. This is I'm quoting Ishwar Basavareddy, who is the director of Morarji Desai Institute of Yoga in New Delhi. Once I had a discussion, and he said, you go to a certain level after, for example, maybe 1 year or 6 months of yoga practice, and then you start from there. So I don't know. But
But what does that mean? You start from there. You mean you need less formal practice?
so you have accumulated a certain amount of so-called benefits. So you call it telomerase, you call it anti-inflammatory, um, good effects, and then you move on from there to further on. Versus another group who maybe does for less time. And then if you look at the longitudinal outcomes, apparently this is what he meant. The outcomes would be so day-to-day benefits, such as not getting a migraine or not depicting a type A personality, maybe for that, a regular practice is required, maybe. But yes, there are no papers. I agree with you on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. And I think you're pointing to something that is especially hard to study, but we know is a real thing, which is the shifts in our perception, the mental shifts, the cognitive shifts that make our experience different, so that we can be more integrated, we can be more mindful. And that is a real thing. I mean, the studies of MBSR, the John Kabat-Zinn's program in the US, they have been so fascinating because they're not necessarily dose response, but rather there's people who have gone through the class may have these lasting changes in their view. We think it's in a view of the world. And so they are benefiting even though they're not continuing the practice. So it may be one of the big realizations for them is, oh, the mind is not what I thought. These are just thoughts, and thoughts are just thoughts. And so that level of, de-reification, the not just seeing through your eyes and thinking that's reality, seems to be one of the early important benefits. Do you think that certain types of yoga promote that, and which types?
I think there are different types and they may have different benefits. And periodicity is very important. And again, dosha-wise asanas and pranayamas are even more important, which is what is the Krishnamachari yoga advocates, customized yoga protocols for an individual of a certain type. So you put them in 3 baskets, and a certain basket of certain age and gender should probably practice a certain kind of a yoga protocol for a certain duration. And those kinds of studies are definitely required. I know you have to go, Elissa, but can you take that last?
But you need to give me the personal advice. So given all you know, for someone like me and maybe you, who wakes up with adrenaline, very type A, achievement oriented, must do, what do you recommend?
I asked this question to Guruji, Dr. H.R. Nagendra. For myself, I get up 2:33 in the morning and I have things lined up and I have to finish them, and almost getting up with a heartbeat, a fast heart, things to do. So he told me do less of Kapal Bhati and more of deep relaxation, Alom Vilom, deep breathing. But I practically find that Sudarshan Kriya helps. If I'm thinking fast, if I am of the type that you and we probably share type A personality, then Sudarshan Kriya, which is a vigorous kind of a Bhastrika, that helps me a lot. That brings down that sort of. So if I'm moving fast and if I'm of that type, it apparently seems to be mitigated by a Bhastrika or a Sudarshan Kriya practically. But I have stopped doing Kapal Bhati. I've reduced my frequency at the advice of Dr. H.R. Nagendra.
Yes, very, very interesting. Thank you. I will try that. And I also wanted to mention that one of the ways that I think about getting at, stress reduction, somatic stress that we can't necessarily talk ourselves out of, is this, short bursts of stressful physiology. So like when Kalabati might be an example, hot exposure, cold exposure. So the hormetic stress process is very interesting. We don't really take advantage of it enough, I think. So one of the studies I'm doing is the Wim Hof method. So we're looking at this hyperventilation and breath retention, 4 cycles. It only takes about 15 minutes. And then the cold showers. And so we want to see how does that compare to a breathing meditation. So the mechanism will be stress arousal versus relaxation.
Wow. Well, that's very, very interesting. We never thought
Yeah.
of combining in this way. Let me review some of the literature in that. But I want to. I know you have to go. You
Yeah, sorry.
type that you need to go. But would you mind taking just the last question of Dr. Parul, asking which type of meditation one should do in the 3 trimesters of pregnancy? Should it vary from one
This,
trimester?
I love this question. You're obviously thinking about this in a much more mechanistic way than I've ever seen. So my answer is, I hope if you want to say any guesses that you have, I would. My answer
Probably,
is I don't know, and I don't know that it's been studied, but I think it's a very sophisticated question.
yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe in the 3rd trimester, you probably suffice by just doing more of breathing techniques, pranayams, and loosening exercises. But we have a protocol we'll share with you, and now Pooja is going to
Ah,
take that up as a PhD project. And we'll keep
mhm.
you updated. Thank you very
Great.
much, Dr. Elissa Epel, for
My
spending
pleasure.
time.
Namaste. Wonderful to meet you all.
Thanks a lot.
Stay safe. Stay well.
Thank you very. Bye bye. Bye now.